At 32. Hannah Cole had learned that losing a job could make an entire life disappear faster than she had imagined. 6 weeks after the Denver company where she worked as an accountant closed, her savings were nearly gone, her apartment lease was ending, and 2 cardboard boxes held everything she could not fit into her aging car. She was calculating whether she could afford another month in the city when Walter Briggs called. "I want to sell you my sheep farm," he said. Hannah almost laughed. Walter had been one of her father's oldest friends, but she had not seen him in years. "Walter, I can barely afford groceries." $50. She stopped packing. "What?" "The farm." $50? "Are you sick, old?" "Mostly." Walter explained that at 74 he was moving in with his daughter. He wanted Hannah to see the place before refusing. 3 days later, she drove into Pine Hollow, Wyoming, with $50 in her wallet and no sensible reason for being there. The farm looked worse than memory. The house leaned slightly toward the wind. Paint peeled from the porch. One section of barn roof sagged, and the fences seemed assembled from wire, stubbornness, and repairs made 20 years too late. 31 sheep watched Hannah from a muddy paddock. "You said farm," she told Walter. "This looks like a collection of future expenses." "That's farming." Walter showed her the deed, tax records, and bills. There was no hidden mortgage or debt transferred with the property. The land was real. So was the price. "Why 50? Hannah asked. "Because free would make you say no." 50 should make me say no. "But you drove here." That irritated her because it was true. Walter walked her through the barn, showed her the feed, water lines, and the fence sections needing immediate attention. Then, a black and white dog emerged from behind the sheep. He was lean, gray around the muzzle, and watched Hannah without approaching. "Moss," Walter said. The dog immediately looked at him. 9 years old. Best worker on this place. Hannah crouched slightly. "Hey, Moss." Moss looked away. Walter almost smiled. "He'll warm up. Very encouraging. One condition comes with the sale." Hannah straightened. "There it is." Walter pointed toward Moss. "He stays. You're selling me 31 sheep and assigning me your dog?" "I'm selling you the farm. Moss belongs to it." Hannah looked at the dog. "Does Moss know that?" "More than you do, by late afternoon." Hannah signed the papers and handed Walter 2 20s and a 10. The absurdity struck her as she watched him fold the bills into his wallet. A month earlier, she had managed spreadsheets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now she owned a deteriorating sheep farm for less than dinner at a Denver restaurant. Walter's daughter arrived before sunset. Walter loaded one suitcase into her vehicle, then rested a hand briefly on Moss's head. The dog did not wag his tail. "Take care of her," Walter murmured. Hannah could not tell which of them he meant. Then they were gone. Silence settled over the property. Hannah stood beside the barn with 31 sheep, 1 indifferent dog, and a house she already suspected had unreliable plumbing. "Excellent decision," she muttered. Moss walked away. After dark, Hannah heated canned soup and tried not to calculate repair costs before bed. She checked the barn. The sheep were settled, but Moss was missing. She called from the porch. Nothing. Then she spotted him beyond the barn, standing motionless in the thin snow. His body faced an old stretch of fence near the far edge of the property. "Moss." Hannah called again. The dog's ears lifted. He did not turn around. He simply remained there, staring through the darkness beyond the forgotten fence. Hannah discovered the frozen water line before sunrise. She turned the kitchen faucet and got 3 reluctant drops, followed by nothing. By 7, she was outside in 2 sweaters and her father's old work jacket, staring at a pipe she barely understood, while 31 sheep complained behind her. Moss sat several yards away, watching. "You can at least pretend to be supportive." His ears moved. Nothing else did. Hannah spent an hour with a hairdryer and extension cord before admitting defeat and calling the number Walter had left for emergencies. Luke Mercer arrived in a mud-streaked pickup 20 minutes later. He was 37, broad-shouldered, and spoke with the calm efficiency of someone who had already repaired 3 things before breakfast. He examined the pipe. "You bought Briggs's place?" "Apparently," Walter said somebody had. "Did he mention she had no idea what she was doing?" Luke glanced at her. "Didn't need to." Hannah decided immediately that she disliked him. Together they thawed the line and insulated the exposed section. Luke refused payment, saying she would probably return the favor someday. Before Hannah could object, shouting from the paddock interrupted them. A section of wire fence had collapsed. 3 sheep were pressing toward the opening. Hannah ran for them, waving her arms. "Back! Go back!" The sheep scattered in 3 directions. Moss remained beside the barn. "Moss!" Hannah shouted. "Do something!" The dog stared at her. Luke leaned against the fence post. "He doesn't know what 'do something' means." "Helpful." Luke gave a sharp whistle followed by a short command Hannah had heard Walter use the previous day. Moss moved instantly. He swept wide around the sheep, turned them neatly, and drove them away from the damaged fence. Hannah stared. "So he does listen." "He listens fine." Luke looked at her. "You're speaking the wrong language." By noon, Hannah's hands hurt from tightening wire. Her boots were soaked, and she had discovered 3 more repairs she could not afford. For the first time, the $50 price felt less like luck than a warning. That afternoon, an older pickup stopped beside the house. A young woman stepped out carrying 2 grocery bags, while a boy climbed down behind her. "Emily Foster," the woman said. "Walter left some food at the store and made me promise I'd bring it when you arrived. He apparently planned my entire first week." That sounds like Walter. Her 8-year-old son, Caleb, had already noticed Moss. "Can I pet him?" Hannah almost said the dog probably would not care. Instead, she shrugged. "If he lets you." Caleb approached slowly and held out his hand. Moss sniffed his fingers. Then, to Hannah's surprise, the dog stood still while Caleb rubbed the gray fur beneath his ear. "He likes me," Caleb announced. "Don't take it personally," Hannah said. "He likes almost everyone more than me." Emily laughed. Before leaving, Caleb asked whether he could visit the sheep again. Hannah told him to ask his mother after sunset. Hannah carried feed into the barn and tried Walter's commands. Moss ignored the first 2, responded perfectly to the third, then looked at her as though grading her performance. "We're going to have to negotiate this relationship," she told him, later. While checking the paddock, Hannah noticed Moss was missing again. She found him near the same old fence from the night before, nose low to the snow. He walked its length slowly, paused near a weathered post, then stared beyond the property. Hannah called him. This time he glanced back before continuing his inspection, uneasy. She phoned Walter. "Why does Moss keep going to the old fence?" "Because that's what he does." "That explains nothing." Walter was quiet for a moment. "Moss checks what people forget." "What does that mean?" "Watch him. You'll learn." Walter ended the call before Hannah could demand a useful answer. She grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the fence. Moss had already disappeared back toward the barn. Hannah swept the beam across the wire. At first, she saw only snow and dead grass. Then, on the far side of the fence, she noticed a line of small hoof prints. Hannah crouched beside them. They were unmistakable. Sheep tracks, and they were leading away from the farm. Hannah checked the flock twice before sunrise. 31 sheep stood inside the paddock, which meant the tracks beyond the old fence were not fresh. That should have reassured her. Instead, she kept thinking about Moss inspecting the same place 2 nights in a row. Luke arrived after breakfast carrying fence staples and a coil of wire. Hannah pointed toward the tracks. "Tell me I'm imagining those." Luke crouched beside them. "Old sheep prints."
"Mine, probably. Snow preserved them." They followed the fence until Moss stopped beside a post half hidden by dead grass. Luke pulled the wire aside and revealed a gap near the ground. "There," Hannah frowned. "A sheep can fit through that." "A determined one can fit through places you wouldn't believe."
Beyond the gap, a narrow trail descended through brush toward a shallow ravine. Hannah followed Luke several hundred yards before the farm disappeared behind the slope. Moss moved ahead without hesitation, occasionally stopping to check behind them. "He knows this route," Hannah said. "Looks that way." The trail eventually reached a weathered wooden structure tucked against the hillside. Half the roof was covered in snow, and one door hung crookedly from its hinges. "What is this old lambing shelter?" Luke said. "Briggs used this ground years ago when the flock was bigger. Ewes sometimes came down here when they were close." Hannah examined the cracked boards. "And nobody thought to mention there was another building on my property for $50? You expected a guided tour?" She gave him a look. "You're enjoying this too much." Back at the farm, Hannah called Walter. He confirmed the shelter had not been regularly used in years. The old fence once separated lambing pasture from the main grazing field, but repairs had gradually been abandoned as his flock shrank. "Then why does Moss still patrol it?" Hannah asked. "Because nobody told Moss the job stopped mattering." Walter's answer irritated her less than it would have 2 days earlier. "I'm closing the gap." "Good. All of it better. And maybe you could have mentioned the shelter before selling me the place?" Walter chuckled. "You found it?" "Moss found it. That's usually how things worked around there." Hannah spent the afternoon repairing the gap with Luke. When they finished, she stood back satisfied for perhaps 30 seconds before a ewe began bleeding from the lower paddock. Moss reacted before either human did. He ran toward a patch of frozen mud near the water trough. One ewe had pushed through a weak crust and trapped a rear leg. Hannah hurried over. "Don't pull her," Luke warned. "You'll hurt the joint." They needed to keep the ewe still while freeing the leg. Hannah approached, but the frightened animal struggled harder. Moss dropped low several feet away, fixing his attention on the ewe without crowding her. The animal stopped fighting long enough for Hannah and Luke to break the frozen mud around its leg. Minutes later, the ewe stumbled free. Hannah checked it for injury while Moss stood nearby. "Good boy," she said. Moss looked at her. Hannah tried one of Walter's short commands, directing him to move the ewe toward the barn. This time, Moss responded immediately. No hesitation, no glance toward Luke. He circled wide and guided the animal exactly where Hannah wanted it. A ridiculous surge of satisfaction warmed her more than her gloves had all day. Luke noticed. "Congratulations." "On what?" "Your employee acknowledged management." Hannah laughed. That evening, she practiced the commands again. Moss still ignored her when her timing was poor, but she began watching him instead of simply repeating herself louder. When she waited, noticed where the sheep were looking, and gave the command at the right moment, he moved. It felt less like controlling him and more like learning a conversation already in progress. Before dinner, Hannah checked the repaired fence. Moss walked beside her. At the old gap, he sniffed the fresh wire, then looked toward the trail leading to the lambing shelter. "Closed," Hannah told him. "Nobody goes through there now." Moss remained still for another moment, then followed her home, inside. Hannah turned on the weather radio while heating soup. The forecast mentioned a winter system moving toward Pine Hollow. Moderate snowfall, strong winds at higher elevations. Nothing unusual for Wyoming. Luke called anyway. You stocked up? Walter left enough food to survive an apocalypse. I meant for the sheep. Yes. Generator checked. Good. Storms around Pine Hollow change faster than forecasts. Hannah looked through the window. Moss lay beside the barn door, facing the flock. I'll manage. By morning, the forecast had changed. Snowfall estimates doubled, wind speeds climbed. Hannah spent the day moving feed under cover and checking the water line Luke had insulated. That evening, the weather radio crackled while she was removing her boots. The routine advisory was gone. A sharper alert replaced it. Hannah stopped moving as the automated voice announced that conditions had intensified unexpectedly. For Pine Hollow and the surrounding county, the National Weather Service had upgraded the approaching system to a blizzard warning. Hannah spent the next morning preparing for the storm as if the farm were testing whether she deserved to own it. She moved extra feed into the barn, filled every water container Walter had left, checked the generator twice, and secured loose boards along the sheep shelter. Moss followed the work from a distance, appearing whenever the flock shifted and disappearing whenever Hannah thought she might actually need him. By noon, the wind had sharpened enough to sting her face. Walter called while she was carrying a bale of hay. You ready? If you mean have I discovered 17 new ways this place can break? Yes. That sounds ready enough. Hannah wedged the phone against her shoulder. Can I ask you something you usually do? Why $50? Walter went quiet. Hannah stopped walking. You said free would make me refuse, but that's not the whole reason. No. Then tell me. Walter sighed. Your father saved that farm once. Hannah set the hay down. Dad, bad year. Feed prices went up, lamb prices went down, and I was close to losing everything. Your father came for lambing season. Worked nights, fixed fences, slept about 4 hours a day. He never told me. Wouldn't surprise me. You paid him? Barely. He knew I couldn't. Hannah looked across the worn barn her father had once worked to save. So you gave me the farm because of him? No. I gave you an opportunity because of him. For $50, your father gave me a season when I needed one. I gave you a door. The words made Hannah uncomfortable rather than grateful. That still sounds like charity. Walter's voice hardened. You signed a deed. You paid the price I asked. What you do next is your responsibility. Nobody sells a farm for $50. I did. Because you felt sorry for me? Because I knew you wouldn't take it for free. Hannah had no answer. Walter continued, quieter now. Staying is the part nobody can give you. After the call ended, Hannah remained beside the hay bale until Moss approached. He sniffed her glove, then walked toward the paddock. Apparently my father already earned your approval, she told him. Moss kept walking. No pressure. By afternoon, Hannah had little time for pride. The forecast worsened again. She checked the generator fuel, moved tools indoors, reinforced the repaired fence, and counted the flock twice. 31. Moss helped her move the sheep closer to the barn with fewer commands than before. Once. Hannah pointed left and gave Walter's short command. Moss turned immediately, sweeping behind 3 stragglers and returning them to the group. Good boy. This time he came close enough for her to touch his shoulder. The moment lasted only seconds, but Hannah felt absurdly pleased. Near 4 o'clock, Emily Foster's pickup pulled into the yard. Caleb jumped out before his mother could stop him. We brought batteries, he announced, holding up a package. Emily followed with canned food, the store's closing early, roads may get bad tonight. You didn't have to bring anything. Walter said new farmers are too proud to ask for help. Hannah sighed. Walter says a lot from a safe distance. Caleb had already gone toward the barn. Moss met him halfway. The boy crouched, rubbing the dog's neck. "Are the sheep scared of storms?" he asked when Hannah joined him. "Probably. What do they do?" Hannah looked toward the flock clustered near the shelter. "Stay together, mostly." Caleb considered that. "Because they're safer? That's the idea." Moss stood beside the boy, watching him with unusual attention. Caleb scratched behind his ear. "He'd keep them safe." Hannah smiled. "He certainly thinks that's his job." Emily called her son back to the truck. Caleb waved to Moss before climbing inside. Hannah watched them drive toward the county road, then return to work. By sunset, the sky had turned the dull gray that made the mountains disappear. Luke called to make sure she had brought everything loose under cover. "Storm's moving faster," he said. "How much faster?" "Enough that I'd get the sheep settled now." Hannah did not argue. She and Moss moved the flock toward the protected paddock. The dog worked with her instead of around her now. She gave a command. He responded. When one ewe hesitated at the gate, Moss adjusted without being told and gently pressured it forward. 31 sheep entered. Hannah counted again. 31. "Not bad," she told Moss. His tail moved once. Hannah laughed. "I'll take it." She shut the gate and headed toward the house. Halfway across the yard, something cold touched her cheek. Hannah looked up. A single snowflake landed on her sleeve. Then another. Within seconds, dozens drifted through the yard. Her phone showed the time. The storm was not supposed to reach Pine Hollow for another 6 hours. The wind rose suddenly. Carrying snow sideways across the barn lights, Moss stopped beside Hannah and lifted his head toward the darkening fields. The first edge of the blizzard had arrived early. By full dark, the storm had swallowed the farm. Snow struck the windows in hard white sheets, and each gust made the old house groan. Hannah checked the generator, pulled on her coat, and crossed to the barn with Moss beside her. The sheep were restless. Several crowded the gate, while others paced along the wall. "Easy," Hannah murmured, though she was not sure whether she meant them or herself. She and Moss worked together to move the flock deeper into the protected section. Hannah counted as they passed. 28, 29, 30, 31, all there. The lights flickered once, went dark, then returned. Her phone rang inside her pocket. Emily. Hannah answered immediately. "Is everything okay?" For several seconds, she heard only wind and breathing. Then Emily said, "Caleb didn't come home." Hannah stopped. "What?" "The school bus dropped him at the usual stop. The driver confirmed it. He should have been home in 5 minutes. When was this? Before the snow got this bad. I thought maybe he'd gone to a neighbor's, but nobody's seen him." Hannah remembered Caleb standing beside Moss only hours earlier, asking whether sheep were afraid of storms. "Have you called the sheriff? They're organizing people now." Emily's voice broke. "Hannah, I can't find him. They will—" Hannah hated how empty the words sounded. She ended the call and immediately contacted Luke. He was already heading toward the Foster property. "I'm coming," Hannah said. "No, Luke. Visibility is almost gone. You don't know those roads well enough in this weather. Caleb is 8 years old, and getting yourself stranded won't help him." Hannah looked at the sheep. "I can search on foot from here. The bus stop is 6 miles from you." "Then tell me where you need people." Luke's answer was firm. "We need you at your farm. Keep the flock secured and monitor the radio. If Caleb somehow heads your direction, you're another occupied location with lights on." Hannah wanted to argue, but a violent gust shook the barn door. She knew he was right about one thing. She was inexperienced. The searchers knew Pine Hollow. She did not. "Call me if anything changes. I will." Hannah returned to the house with Moss and found Walter's old emergency radio. Voices came through in fragments. Search teams checked the route between the bus stop and Emily's house. A deputy searched the roadside ditch. Neighbors checked sheds, porches, vehicles, and outbuildings. No Caleb. Hannah stood beside the kitchen window, staring into a world reduced to swirling white. 20 minutes passed, then 40. The reports became shorter. No footprints, no dropped backpack, no glove. No sign that an 8-year-old boy had ever walked away from the road. Snow was covering everything faster than the teams could search it. Hannah called Emily once, but ended the conversation quickly. Emily was trying to remain available for the sheriff. "He hates the dark," she whispered before hanging up. Hannah closed her eyes. Behind her, Moss began pacing. At first, she assumed he was reacting to the wind. Then he went to the door. No. Moss returned to the window, then paced back toward the door. Hannah led him into the barn instead. He moved immediately among the sheep, circling them once, then again. Hannah watched him. "They're all here." Moss ignored her. He moved more slowly the third time, sniffing near several animals before stopping beside the gate. Hannah counted again. 31. Moss looked toward the far wall. Beyond it lay the old fence and the abandoned lambing route. Hannah felt uneasy. "What is it?" The radio crackled. Luke's voice came through. "Search Team 2, anything?" "Negative. Snow's erased the roadside tracks." Another voice followed. "Nothing at the creek crossing." Moss began whining. Hannah had never heard him make that sound. He moved to the barn door and scratched once. Moss. He looked directly at her, then toward the fields. Hannah remembered Walter's words. "Moss checks what people forget. There's nothing out there." Moss scratched again. Hannah reached for his collar, but before she caught it, another gust pushed the poorly latched outer door inward several inches. Moss forced through the opening. Hannah ran after him. The dog crossed the yard at full speed. She followed as far as the barn light reached. "Moss, come for 1 second." His black and white shape appeared through the blowing snow. He was heading toward the old fence. Then the blizzard swallowed him. Hannah stood at the edge of the darkness, calling his name. Moss did not come back. Hannah called Moss until the wind swallowed her voice. Nothing answered. She backed into the barn, forced the door shut, and grabbed Walter's radio. "Luke, Moss just ran out." Static cracked. "What?" "He went toward the old fence. Leave him. Hannah, he doesn't run off. He's a working dog. He knows the land better than you do. Stay inside." Hannah stared through the narrow barn window. Something made him leave. And something will get you killed if you follow him in this visibility. Luke's voice softened. "We're still searching for Caleb. Don't make us search for you too." Hannah closed her eyes. Understood. But she did not return to the house. Moss had circled the flock 3 times before leaving. She could still see him moving among them, pausing as if something were wrong. Hannah stepped into the pen and began counting. 1, 2, 3. The sheep shifted nervously. She reached 30 and stopped. She started again, slower. 30. Her stomach tightened. No, earlier there had been 31. Hannah checked behind the feeding racks, the protected stalls, even the narrow space beside the hay. 30 sheep. One was missing. She looked toward the far wall and suddenly understood at least part of Moss's behavior. He had not been searching for Caleb. He had been counting his flock in the only way he knew how, and one animal was gone. Hannah pictured the repaired gap, the old tracks beyond it, and the narrow trail descending toward the abandoned lambing ground. The search teams were concentrating between the bus stop and the foster house. Nobody had reason to search the old pasture. Moss did. Hannah keyed the radio. "Luke, I'm missing a sheep." "What? There were 31. Now there are 30. "Lock the others down. We'll deal with it after the storm." Moss went toward the old lambing route. Silence. Then Luke understood what she was considering. Absolutely not. "If the sheep got through somewhere, Hannah." "Caleb is 6 miles from your place." "I know." "Then stay there." Hannah looked at the storm outside. Luke's reasoning was sound. Moss could be chasing a lost ewe and nothing more. Following him might accomplish nothing except adding another emergency. Then she remembered Walter saying Moss checked what people forgot. Hannah had spent her first days treating the dog's habits as stubbornness until each one revealed a purpose. She could not ignore him now simply because the weather made trusting him frightening. She put on insulated overalls, another sweater, her heaviest coat, and snow boots. Into a small pack went a wool blanket, flashlight, rope, water, and spare batteries. She clipped the radio inside her coat. Hannah Luke's voice returned. "Tell me you're still at the barn." She hesitated. "I'm going as far as the old fence." "No. I'll turn back if I lose the route." "You'll lose it in 50 yards. Then I'll come back, Hannah." She switched the radio volume lower, but left it on. Outside, the cold struck with shocking force. Hannah tied one end of the rope to the fence near the barn and followed it until she reached the far post, using the line to keep her orientation when the buildings disappeared behind blowing snow. The repaired section was intact, but several yards beyond it she found another place where drifting snow had pushed loose wire downward. Something had crossed there. Hannah climbed carefully over. Moss's tracks appeared briefly in the flashlight beam, 4 prints, then 4 more, already softening beneath fresh snow. She followed. Within minutes, the wind erased them. Hannah stopped. The farm lights were gone. Everything around her was white movement and darkness. Fear finally overcame determination. Luke had been right. She turned toward where she thought the fence should be, then hesitated. Her own tracks were disappearing too. The radio crackled against her chest. "Hannah, answer me." She raised it. "I'm near the old trail. Turn around now. I lost Moss's tracks." "Then you have no reason to keep going." Hannah started back. Her flashlight crossed a shallow depression in the snow. Something dark marked its edge. She crouched. A tiny streak of red stained the white surface. Beside it was a fresh hoofprint. Another appeared several feet farther down the slope. Blood. Not much, but enough. The missing sheep had come this way, probably cutting a leg on the damaged wire. Hannah followed the marks cautiously. Hoofprint, blood, another print. The trail angled toward the ravine and the old lambing shelter. "Hannah," Luke said through the radio, "where are you? I found the sheep's trail." "Forget the sheep. Moss didn't—" "You are not Moss. Turn back." A gust nearly knocked Hannah sideways. She planted her boots and looked behind her. Nothing remained visible. Ahead, the trail vanished into white. For several seconds, she heard only wind. Then a sound reached her, so faint she almost mistook it for the storm. A bark. Hannah lifted her head. Moss silence. Then another bark came from somewhere below the ridge. A third followed, sharp and deliberate. Hannah had heard Moss bark around the sheep, but never like this. 3 calls, evenly separated, carrying through the wind. She raised the radio. What Hannah stared into the white darkness ahead. "I can hear Moss. Then call him back." Another bark sounded in the distance. Moss was not coming toward her. He was staying exactly where he was. Hannah tightened her grip on the flashlight. "He isn't lost," she said. "He's calling me." Hannah moved toward the barking. Each step required effort now. Snow reached above her ankles in the open ground and deeper where the wind had piled it against brush. She kept the flashlight angled downward, searching for the faint trail of blood from the missing sheep. The marks appeared, vanished, then appeared again. Moss barked once more. "I'm coming," Hannah shouted, though the wind threw the words back at her. Luke's voice crackled from inside her coat. "Hannah, answer me." She pulled out the radio without stopping. "I'm following Moss. Turn around, now. He's near the old shelter. You don't know that. I know this trail goes there." Static swallowed Luke's reply. Hannah lowered the radio and continued. Her boot struck something buried beneath the snow. She stumbled, landed hard on one knee, and threw out her left hand. Pain shot through her fingers. When she stood, she realized her glove had come off. She found it half buried several feet behind her, packed with snow and uselessly wet inside. Hannah shoved it into her pocket and pulled her sleeve over her exposed hand. "Brilliant," she muttered. A dark shape appeared ahead. Moss. He stood perhaps 20 yards away, almost invisible against the storm except for the white patch on his chest. Relief surged through her. "Moss, come." He did not. Instead, he barked, turned, and disappeared downslope. Of course. Hannah followed. A minute later, Moss appeared again, closer this time. He looked directly at her, waited until she moved toward him, then ran ahead. Hannah stopped. The pattern was unmistakable. He was not wandering. He was checking whether she followed. "All right," she whispered. "Show me." Moss led her down the old lambing route. Twice Hannah lost him completely. Twice he returned through the whiteout, waited, and guided her onward. The ground became uneven near the ravine. Hannah remembered walking this path with Luke in daylight, when it had seemed harmless. Now every depression looked like a place where one wrong step could break an ankle. Then her flashlight caught a wooden post. Another appeared beyond it. The old shelter emerged from the storm like a shadow, half buried against the hillside. Moss stood at the crooked doorway, barking. Hannah stumbled toward him. "You found her." She expected to hear a sheep bleating. Instead, Moss blocked the entrance. "Move!" he barked again. Hannah squeezed past him and swept her flashlight across the interior. Snow had blown through gaps in the boards. In one corner lay the missing sheep. Breathing hard, one hind leg marked with dried blood. "There you are." Then Hannah noticed something behind it. Blue fabric, too bright to belong in the shelter. Her flashlight moved higher. A small boot appeared beneath a mound of straw. Hannah stopped breathing. Caleb. She pushed past the sheep and dropped to her knees. Caleb Foster lay curled against the wooden wall, his coat covered in snow, his face frighteningly pale. His eyes remained closed. Moss immediately squeezed beside him and pressed his body against the boy's chest and stomach. "Caleb." Hannah touched his cheek. "Cold. Caleb, can you hear me?" No answer. Panic rose, but she forced herself to remember basic first aid. She checked his breathing. Weak, but present. She touched the side of his neck with trembling fingers. "Pulse. Okay, you're here." She pulled the wool blanket from her pack and wrapped it around him without trying to make him stand. Moss remained pressed tightly against his side. Hannah finally understood the flattened straw beside Caleb. Moss had already been lying there. The dog had found him before Hannah arrived and used his own body to keep the boy warm. Caleb's eyelids moved. "Moss," he whispered. "He's here." Hannah leaned closer. "I'm here too." Caleb looked confused. His lips barely moved. She got out. Hannah glanced at the injured sheep. The sheep, a tiny nod, saw her by the road. The words came slowly. Caleb had seen the sheep after leaving the bus. He knew she belonged to Hannah and tried to guide her back toward the farm. Then the snow thickened. He followed the animal instead of the road until he no longer knew where home was. "Shelter," he whispered. "Saw it." Hannah swallowed hard. An 8-year-old boy had followed a lost sheep into a storm because he believed he could bring it home. "You did enough," she said. "You don't have to do anything else." She raised the radio. "Luke, come in." Luke, static. Hannah moved toward the doorway. "Luke, I found Caleb. Old lambing shelter. Caleb is alive." The radio hissed. Then a broken fragment of Luke's voice reached her. "Repeat." Hannah climbed halfway outside, shielding the radio from the wind. "Found Caleb. He's alive. Old lambing shelter." This time she heard, "Found. Caleb. Alive." Then the signal vanished. Hannah returned to the boy. Moss had not moved from his side. "They know," she said, hoping it was true. "They're coming." Caleb's eyes closed again. Hannah touched his shoulder. "Stay with me, buddy. Look at Moss." His eyes opened slightly. "He found me." Hannah looked at the dog. "Yeah, he did." A heavy thump sounded above them. Hannah froze. Snow sifted down from between the roof boards. Moss lifted his head. Another sound followed a long wooden groan. Hannah aimed her flashlight upward. One of the old roof beams had bowed under the accumulating snow. A crack split along its center. Then the entire shelter shuddered. The shelter groaned again, and Hannah looked up as a thin stream of snow sifted through the cracked roof. They could not stay there long, but taking Caleb into the blizzard immediately might be just as dangerous. She tightened the blanket around him and tucked the edges beneath his shoulders. "Caleb, open your eyes." His eyelids fluttered. "Tired. I know, but I need you to talk to me." Moss pressed himself firmly against Caleb's other side, his black and white coat dusted with melting snow. Hannah rubbed the boy's covered arms gently. "Tell me about the sheep." Caleb glanced weakly toward the injured animal. "She was alone, and you followed her?" He nodded. "Thought I could bring her back." "Why didn't you go home?" "I thought I could do it myself." The words struck Hannah harder than they should have. She had arrived in Pine Hollow believing much the same thing, that needing help meant failing, that accepting Walter's farm made her weak, that she had to prove she could manage everything alone. Now an 8-year-old boy lay freezing beside her because he had believed helping meant handling danger by himself. "Listen to me," Hannah said. "Doing something alone doesn't make it braver." Caleb's eyes opened a little wider. "You came alone?" Hannah almost laughed despite the fear. "Fair point." She glanced at Moss. "But I followed someone who knew where he was going." Moss lifted his head at the sound of her voice. The roof creaked again. Hannah grabbed the radio. "Luke, come in." Static. She moved toward the doorway. "Luke." "Old lambing shelter. Caleb is alive. We need help." A broken voice answered. "Heard you. Location. Old lambing ground, south side of the ravine. Teams redirecting." Then static returned. At least they had heard enough. Hannah went back to Caleb. She kept him talking his school, his favorite sheep, whether Moss was smarter than most people. Caleb managed a faint smile at that one. "He's smarter than you. Tonight I'm willing to accept that." Another crack sounded overhead. This one was louder. A fragment of wood dropped near the injured sheep. Moss stood immediately. Hannah aimed her flashlight upward. The central beam had bowed farther. They had minutes perhaps less. She keyed the radio again. "Luke, the shelter roof is failing." His response came through broken but understandable. "Can't reach shelter. Drifts too deep. Move uphill. Higher ground." Hannah looked at Caleb. Carrying him through deep snow would be difficult, but staying was no longer an option. She looped the rope around herself and used the remaining length to secure the blanket around Caleb. "We're moving." "Cold," he whispered. "I know." Hannah helped him sit up. His legs barely supported him. She pulled one of his arms across her shoulders and lifted. Moss stayed pressed against his other side until they reached the doorway. The injured sheep struggled upright behind them. "Come on," Hannah told it. Moss turned, gave a sharp bark, and the sheep stumbled forward. Outside. The blizzard hit them like a wall. Hannah could barely see 10 feet. She remembered the slope from her daylight walk with Luke and aimed uphill, away from the ravine. Every few steps, she spoke to Caleb. "Tell me your teacher's name." "Mrs. Allen." "Favorite food?" "Pizza." "Pineapple." Caleb made a weak sound of disgust. "Good," still thinking clearly. Moss moved between Caleb and the sheep, keeping the animal close without ranging far. Behind them came a tremendous crack. Hannah turned. The shelter roof sagged. Then one section collapsed inward beneath the snow. Had they waited another minute, they might still have been underneath it. "Keep moving," she whispered. The radio crackled. Luke's voice came faintly. "Hannah, lights. Look uphill." She raised her head. Through the whiteout, she thought she saw a pale glow. "I see something." "Come toward." Hannah adjusted Caleb's weight and struggled forward. For several yards, the light strengthened. Relief surged through her. "They're close, Caleb." Moss ran ahead, then returned. Hannah followed him. The wind suddenly shifted, throwing a dense curtain of snow across the slope. The glow vanished. Hannah stopped. Lonely static answered. She turned slowly, searching in every direction. No shelter, no trail, no lights. Nothing but white. Caleb sagged against her. Hannah tightened her arm around him while Moss stood several feet ahead, staring into the storm. The rescue lights were gone. Hannah could no longer tell which direction led uphill. Wind erased every shape beyond a few yards, and the rescue lights did not return. Caleb sagged against her shoulder. "Caleb, stay with me." "Trying," he whispered. His answer frightened her more than silence would have. Hannah tightened her grip around him and looked at Moss. The dog stood facing the whiteout, ears forward, snow collecting along his back. "You got us this far," she said. "What now?" Moss moved several yards to the right, stopped, then returned. He repeated the movement, nose lifted into the wind. Hannah followed cautiously, half carrying Caleb. The injured sheep struggled behind them. "Favorite movie?" Hannah asked. Caleb murmured something she could not hear. Louder. "The one with the dragons." "That narrows it down tremendously." A weak laugh escaped him. "Good. Keep him talking. Keep him awake." Moss suddenly stopped. His head turned sharply. Hannah heard nothing except wind. Then the dog ran forward. "Moss!" He vanished. Panic hit immediately. "Moss! Come back!" No response. For the first time since leaving the farm, Hannah felt truly abandoned. Moss had been the only creature among them who understood this land. Now even he was gone. Caleb's knees buckled. Hannah lowered him carefully into the snow, keeping the blanket wrapped around him. "Just a second. Don't sleep." The sheep crowded near them, trembling. Hannah raised the radio. "Luke, I lost the lights. I'm with Caleb somewhere uphill from the shelter." Static. "Luke, A voice broke through, too distorted to understand. Hannah shouted again, but the signal disappeared. She looked toward where Moss had vanished. "Please," she whispered. Minutes seemed to stretch. Then, through the storm, she heard barking. Not ahead, closer. Another bark answered from farther away, followed by a human shout. Hannah stood. A dark shape burst through the snow. Moss! He ran directly to her, circled once, then turned back. Behind him appeared a beam of light, then another. Hannah Luke's voice cut through the wind. "Here!" she screamed. Moss raced toward the lights and returned with Luke and 2 rescuers following him. Luke dropped beside Caleb while one rescuer wrapped another insulated blanket around the boy. "How long has he been like this?" "He's been responsive, but getting sleepier. You kept him awake. As much as I could." Luke squeezed her shoulder once. "Good." The rescuers secured Caleb onto a compact rescue sled. Hannah remained close until Luke said, "We've got him." Only then did she realize how violently she was shaking. "The sheep," she said. Luke stared at her. "Of course there's a sheep." Ross stood beside the injured animal, as though refusing to leave without it. One rescuer gave a disbelieving laugh and looped Hannah's rope around the ewe loosely enough to guide her. They moved toward the higher trail where snowmobiles waited beyond the worst drifts. Moss stayed beside Caleb's sled. At the Pine Hollow Clinic, Emily reached her son before Hannah had fully removed her frozen coat. She collapsed beside the bed, holding Caleb's hand while the doctor examined him. Hannah waited in the hallway with Luke and Moss. Eventually, the doctor came out. "Hypothermia. But you reached him in time. We expect a full recovery." Hannah closed her eyes. Luke exhaled beside her. "And the sheep?" Hannah asked. He laughed softly. "Leg cut. Nothing serious. Later." Emily found Hannah and hugged her without speaking. When she finally pulled away, her face was wet. "He said Moss kept him warm." Hannah looked down at the dog. "Moss did most of it. You followed him. That mattered too." Though Hannah was not ready to say it, outside the clinic, Luke explained what none of the searchers had understood during the storm. "We searched where Caleb should have gone from the bus stop toward home. Nobody had a reason to think he'd head toward your property. Moss did. Not because he was looking for Caleb." Hannah nodded. She understood now. He counted the flock. The missing ewe had slipped through the weakened fence and wandered toward the old lambing ground. Caleb saw it near the road and followed, trying to bring it home. Moss noticed one sheep missing, tracked it along a route he had patrolled for years, and found both the ewe and Caleb in the shelter. Then he stayed with the boy until Hannah followed. Moss had done exactly what Walter had said he always did. He checked what people forgot. Hannah crouched and placed both hands against the dog's neck. "You didn't leave anybody behind, did you?" Moss leaned briefly against her before looking toward the clinic door. When Hannah called Walter, he listened without interrupting. At the end, she said, he found Caleb because one sheep was missing. Walter was quiet for a moment. That dog always knew who belonged. Several days later, after the roads reopened and the farm emerged beneath hard banks of snow, a polished SUV pulled into Hannah's driveway. A man stepped out holding a folder. He explained that he represented a buyer interested in acquiring several properties around Pine Hollow. Then he named a price for Hannah's sheep farm. Hannah stared at him. It was thousands of times more than the $50 she had paid. The offer sat on Hannah's kitchen table for 3 days. It was enough money to erase the immediate problems waiting beyond Pine Hollow. She could pay what she owed, replace her failing car, return to Denver, and rent an apartment without counting every dollar. A month earlier, she would have signed before the buyer finished explaining the number. Instead, she kept looking through the window at 31 sheep and one black and white dog, who still treated watching them as the most important work in the world. On the fourth morning, Emily's pickup arrived. Caleb climbed out slowly, bundled in a heavy coat. His color restored, but his movements still cautious. Moss rose immediately. Caleb hurried as much as his mother allowed and wrapped both arms around the dog's neck. Moss endured the embrace for several seconds, gave Caleb one brief lick on the cheek, then turned his head toward the flock. Caleb laughed. "He missed me." "He's checking whether the sheep survived your reunion," Hannah said. Emily hugged Hannah again, less desperately than at the clinic. "The doctor says he's fine. No lasting damage." Caleb walked toward the repaired paddock fence, but stopped before opening the gate. "Can I go in?" Hannah noticed the question. "Yes. With me?" Together they checked the ewe Caleb had followed into the storm. The cut on its hind leg was healing. Caleb touched its wool gently. "I thought I could bring her back myself." "I know, that was stupid." Hannah shook her head. Trying to help wasn't stupid. Going alone was... Caleb looked at Moss. He went alone. Moss has 9 years of experience and better instincts than both of us, combined. Unfortunately. Later that afternoon, Hannah called the buyer and declined the offer. The man increased it. Hannah declined again. When the call ended, she expected panic. Instead, she felt something quieter. Responsibility, freely chosen. Walter called that evening. Hannah told him about the offer. "You should have taken it if that's what you wanted," he said. "I know. Don't keep the place because you think you owe me. I don't, or your father. I don't owe him either." Hannah looked around the worn kitchen. "That's why I'm staying." Walter was silent. Hannah finally understood what he had meant when he said he had given her a door. $50 had not bought her prosperity. It had bought her the chance to decide without having charity forced upon her. Her father had once given Walter a season of labor when the farm was failing. Walter had returned that kindness without demanding repayment from Hannah. What happened afterward belonged to her. Spring did not transform the sheep farm into an easy life. Hannah still had bills, the barn roof still needed work. She learned lambing through sleepless nights, kept careful accounts, cut unnecessary expenses, and built a realistic plan for making the small flock support itself. Luke helped when she needed another pair of hands, but he stopped arriving as if expecting disaster. One morning they repaired fence together without arguing for almost an hour. "You're getting disappointingly competent," he said. "I've been waiting months for that apology." That wasn't one. Their friendship settled into something Hannah did not need to name yet. Some evenings Luke stayed for coffee after chores. Some evenings he went home. Hannah discovered that accepting help did not mean surrendering ownership of her life. Walter visited when the first spring grass appeared. His daughter drove him to the farm, and Hannah saw his eyes move immediately toward the barn, fences, flock, and finally Moss. "Still 31, he asked. 31? Not bad. Hannah called Moss and gave him a short command. The dog immediately swept behind 2 wandering ewes and guided them toward the gate. Walter watched without speaking. Moss returned and stopped beside Hannah. What she asked Walter? Nothing, but he was smiling. Hannah eventually repaired the old lambing shelter instead of tearing it down. Luke replaced the damaged roof beam. Hannah strengthened the walls and cleared the debris left by the collapse. She did not turn the place into a monument. Caleb would have hated that. And so would she. She mounted one small wooden sign beside the doorway. "No one left behind." Caleb approved. He still visited the farm, but he never crossed a fence without asking first. By early summer, the blizzard had become one of those Pine Hollow stories people told with details that grew slightly larger each time. Hannah stopped correcting most of them. She knew what had actually happened. Search teams had followed the logical route between a bus stop and a child's home. Moss had followed something simpler. One sheep was missing. To him, that was enough. He tracked the ewe to the shelter, found Caleb, stayed beside him, kept him warm, called Hannah through the storm, and later brought rescuers back when Hannah could no longer find them. He had not performed a miracle. He had done his job with absolute devotion. One evening, Hannah was closing the paddock when a ewe slipped away from the others and wandered toward the lower field. Hannah sighed and reached for the gate. Moss was already standing. He looked at the ewe, then at Hannah. Months earlier, he would have acted before she understood what he was doing. Now he waited. Hannah gave the command. Moss ran. He swept across the grass in a wide arc, turned behind the ewe, and calmly guided it back toward the flock. Hannah counted as the animals settled. 28, 29, 30, 31, all there. Moss returned and lay beside the gate, eyes still on the sheep. Hannah rested her arms on the fence. She remembered arriving with 2 bags in her car, almost no savings, and $50 she could barely justify spending. She had believed buying this broken farm meant she had reached the bottom of her life. She had been wrong. The $50 had not purchased an escape from failure. It had purchased a choice. Walter had opened the door. Moss had taught her what staying meant. A flock did not survive because every member was strong enough to stand alone. It survived because when one disappeared, someone noticed, someone searched, someone refused to leave it behind. Hannah had spent years believing being needed was another word for being trapped. Now she understood the difference. A trap was a place you could not leave. Belonging was a place you could leave, but chose to return to. The last sunlight stretched across the Pine Hollow fields as Hannah closed the gate. Moss lifted his head, satisfied that every sheep was where it belonged. Hannah looked toward the farmhouse, the repaired barn, and the old lambing shelter beyond the fence. For the first time in years, she did not wonder where she would go next. She scratched Moss behind one ear and walked toward the lights of the house. This time, he followed her home.